How long? That's the only thing I could force out of my mouth, and it came out like a knife. The music, the laughter, the clinking glasses at our 10th anniversary party froze in midair. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me as I stood in my red dress, staring at the man I thought was my husband, and at the tiny little girl who had just called him Daddy. It should have been the happiest night of my life. 10 years together, through struggles, through heartbreak, through miscarriages that left me curled on cold bathroom floors praying for a miracle. I thought this party was proof we'd made it. Instead, in 1 second, it became the funeral of my marriage. The little girl, maybe 3 years old, came running with curls bouncing and arms stretched wide, and Gregory, my husband, didn't hesitate. He dropped down, scooped her up, and smiled at her like she was the center of his universe. It wasn't the polite smile he gave colleagues. It was warm, genuine, fatherly. A smile I'd never seen when I begged God to give us a child. And standing right behind her was Tiffany, my best friend. My sister in everything but blood. The one who held my hand when I cried about infertility, who sent me flowers after every failed round of treatment. She'd introduced this little girl as her niece visiting for the weekend. That lie burned hotter than the candles on the tables. How long, I asked again, my voice lower this time, but sharper. Tiffany's face went pale and Gregory opened his mouth like a fish pulled from water. The silence stretched so thin, I thought it might snap. Then Tiffany whispered, 4 years. Since after my divorce. 4 years. I laughed, cold, bitter, the kind of laugh that makes people step back. 4 years of weekends away, of business trips, of late-night calls that I told myself were work. 4 years of me stabbing needles into my stomach, crying into pillows, thinking I was broken, while he was raising another child with her. You built a family while I buried mine, I said, my voice trembling but steady. No one at the party moved. The guests just stared frozen in that garden filled with roses, string lights, and deceit. Then I told him, put her down, Gregory. The little girl clung tighter to his shirt. No, Daddy, stay. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't some fling. This was a second life, one that had grown roots in the soil of my ignorance. I straightened my spine, lifted my champagne glass, and told the crowd, drink up. It's not every day you watch a marriage end in real time. And I drained that glass like it was the last toast of my life. That night didn't end when the last guest left. Gregory came into the living room later looking older, smaller somehow. He tried to explain, said it started with Tiffany's late-night calls after her divorce, said he was just helping a friend. He told me he didn't want to abandon his child once Tiffany got pregnant. I just stared at him, numb but clear. You didn't just cheat, I told him. You stole from me. You stole moments I begged for. Her first steps, her first words, bedtime stories. You let me drown in guilt while you thrived in a life I never knew existed. He admitted things I didn't think I could survive hearing. How he'd been there when the little girl called him Daddy for the first time. How he'd bought her birthday cakes and stuffed animals while I sat in sterile clinics bleeding hope onto hospital paper gowns. And then he made the mistake of showing me a photo he carried in his wallet, him at the zoo with her on his shoulders, smiling bigger than he had in years. I ripped it in two and dropped it on the floor between us. No more double lives, I said. The next morning, my grief turned into strategy. I drained our joint accounts of anything that had my name on it froze. His credit called a lawyer who specialized in high-asset fraud. The locksmith changed the locks before sundown. Tiffany thought she could run the narrative online, posting pictures with captions about protecting her daughter from hate, painting herself as a victim. But I knew how to fight lies with receipts. That's when I reached out to her ex-husband Marcus, the man she left before latching on to Gregory. We met at a coffee shop, sat across from each other like survivors of the same wreck. He slid me a flash drive across the table. Texts, screenshots, voice memos, he said. She told me the same things, how strong you were, how exhausting it was to be your friend, how she deserved better. She didn't just want your husband, she wanted your life. Those files were dynamite. They showed Tiffany for what she was, a woman who built her power on silence, on convincing wives to stay embarrassed and husbands to stay weak. I wasn't embarrassed anymore. I had clarity, and I had proof. Court was brutal, dragged out, filled with Tiffany's crocodile tears and Gregory's pathetic apologies. But when my lawyer dropped those files, the judge called Tiffany's behavior a pattern of manipulation and Gregory's actions a gross breach of marital trust. I walked out with financial independence, my dignity acknowledged in black and white, and a future that no longer belonged to either of them. Gregory was demoted at work once the scandal leaked. Tiffany lost custody battles and even her teaching license when some of her messages went public. Marcus got shared custody of their daughter and me. I sold the house that had turned into a mausoleum of lies and used the money to launch my own firm. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for a child or a man to complete me. I was whole. And then something happened I'll never forget. One evening, I came home and found a plain envelope taped to my door. Inside was a drawing, crayon scribbles of me standing under a sun, holding hands with a little girl with curly hair. At the bottom, in a child's handwriting, it said, "Miss Nia is nice. I remember. Lila." That's the name I'll give her. I sat there with that paper pressed to my chest, not crying, not angry anymore, just heavy with the truth. That child never lied. Only the adults did. She had called him Daddy because that's who he'd been to her, not because she meant to shatter me. And in her innocent drawing, she reminded me that I wasn't defined by betrayal, but by the choices I made after it. I didn't forgive Gregory, and I didn't forgive Tiffany, but I stopped carrying their poison in my veins. I carried my own future instead. I booked a flight, took a job overseas, and started living like the woman they tried to convince me I could never be free, dangerous, and absolutely unbroken. So here's my question to you. When someone betrays you on this level, do you believe forgiveness is strength, or is walking away with your head high the real victory? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear the stories of the lies you've seen, the strength you've found, and the justice you think people deserve. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just make you question everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and the truth.